Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Harkleroad-Adams channel here on YouTube. I am your host, Drew Hare, with our analysts, Matt Harkleroad and Chris Adams. Say hi, guys.
Hi, Matt here.
And happy March to everyone. We are coming to you post-Super Bowl, pre-free agency, and pre the start of the 2021 year for the NFL. But before we jump into free agency and any kind of additional discussions about going forward, let's look back at the Super Bowl and take a couple minutes. We've already, most of the ink has already been spilled on a 31-9 victory for the Tampa Bay Bucks over the Kansas City Chiefs, but we haven't talked about it, and that's why you guys are here. You want to hear Matt and you want to hear Chris's thoughts on this. So, Matt, let's jump with you first. Any thoughts to jump out? Obviously, when you're down two offensive linemen, that is usually a bad thing. Like, it's a really good pass rush.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story of this game, right? Is that defense for Tampa Bay, and that starts up front for them in this game. All season, really, but in this game specifically, because they were down, the Kansas City Chiefs were down their two tackles. That's a real bad situation to be in, especially when you have good pass rush and a varied pass rush like Tampa Bay had. Mahomes did about as much as you can ask a player to do behind an offensive line that's struggling like that. He made some amazing plays downfield, but had some drops on that, on some big key plays where he was doing everything he could to get the ball downfield. But all in all, I would say it's probably one of the worst games that Patrick Mahomes has played in the NFL. Not just the fact that, his completion rate was so low. And, again, he didn't have a whole lot of help. I mean, he had big drop passes by his two number one targets, and then an obvious touchdown hitting the hands drop at one point, too. So, the score of this could have been a little bit closer, but it's not like Mahomes was playing out of his mind, so much so that, that it felt like there was a danger of them ever coming back. That offense was just struggling from top to bottom, and they had no run game to speak of. And then, Tom Brady on the other side played a pretty masterful game, to be honest. Putting the ball all over the place, playing about as well as you can ask. But I mean, they didn't really need him to do a ton. It almost felt like that, Peyton's second Super Bowl team victory, where, Brady probably did a little bit more in this game than Peyton did in that one. But at the same time, when you're dominating like they are on defense, your offense doesn't need to do a ton to make the game, make it a win. And one of the more boring Super Bowls we've had in recent memory. So, but
yeah, that's saying something after that Patriots. That's saying something after that Patriots-Rams game from a couple of years ago too.
Yeah.
Chris, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Matt. I will say I didn't find the game quite as boring, maybe as some other people did, and here's why. Like, I thought it was entertaining in the fact that it was not what anybody expected, right? Like, if you were looking at predictions before the game, it was kind of split. More people were picking Kansas City, but there were definitely some Brady believers who had the Bucks, but most people picked it to be a very close game and a high scoring game. People thought, okay, it's going to be a shootout. Whoever has the ball last is going to win. And it really wasn't. Like, nobody that I had talked to or read was predicting a Tampa Bay blowout. Some people had maybe predicted a Kansas City blowout, but nobody was predicting a Tampa blowout like that. And maybe it should have been more on the people's radar screen because of the injuries to the offensive line. But yeah, when you factor that in and you factor some key drops, Kansas City had, and also the fact that Kansas City has basically just like quit running the ball, and just given up as that is part of their team. Factor in that, and then just a truly great performance from the defense as a whole, and Brady like turning back time once again, and showing why he is the GOAT. So I thought it was entertaining to watch, in just the way it was the game that nobody expected. And I also thought it was interesting too. I think we've kind of talked on this show and some others about, on the whole, the AFC is was stronger than the NFC this year, and that's still the case, even though Tampa Bay was the champion, right? It doesn't mean that they were the better conference. In fact, all of the stars on offense for Tampa this year most recently played in the AFC. Brady, Gronk, Antonio Brown were the big heroes in the game on the offensive side of the ball, at least, and they all joined the team this year from the AFC. So not sure what that really means, other than it's just an interesting aside. And I think still on the whole, the AFC is stronger than the NFC right now, but hats off to Brady and Arians and that whole Tampa defense.
Yeah, and going back to the AFC strength, do either of you guys think this is like, a potential like chink in the armor tied to what the Kansas City Chiefs future outlook is, or do you think it was just more of like a blip on the radar? Or
I don't think. I think Kansas City is still the best team in the league going forward, at least until that Mahomes mega extension kicks in, and they'll have to, and they're going to have to make some decisions about who they don't bring back. Which is probably going to be on the defensive side of the ball there, because they're going to keep Hill. Obviously, they're going to keep Kelsey. But I think as long as they have Mahomes and as long as they have those playmakers, I don't think a blueprint was written for how to beat the Chiefs. I think you have to be on your certainly the offensive lineman being out played a big role, but also you just have to be on your A game. You can't make mistakes against the Chiefs and Mahomes. You can't give them second chances. You can't blow opportunities. And Tampa did not do that. They played a very, very clean game. And they cashed in when they were in the red zone. You cannot take field goals instead of touchdowns when you are playing Mahomes and the Chiefs. And the Patriots didn't do that. Brady and company cashed in. So no, I don't think there was no blueprint drawn for how to beat the Chiefs other than maybe play them when they're down 2 tackles. I think it was just, like I said, kudos to Tampa for playing a fantastic game.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think, from the Chiefs' standpoint, maybe the only thing I could think of is that maybe with that upcoming mega deal from Mahomes, maybe you start to see the flaw in the system of paying somebody that much money if you can't afford to have, the depth that you need to go the long haul. At a position like offensive line, where inevitably somebody gets hurt, and having good backup offensive linemen, you can see what like a team like the Cleveland Browns was able to do without some of their best players going into the playoffs, being out, and then having people step in that had multiple seasons under their belts, like Kendall Lamb, who's been in this league for a long time, and then Kansas City obviously didn't have the drop off from their starting tackles to their next level tackles. They lost both, sure, and that's really unfortunate, but it was a huge drop off in caliber of player. And I wonder if you start to get into those problems even more when you've got 30% of your cap locked up in one player. And then if you think about having to pay Kelsey and Hill coming up too, that's a ton of money. And then Clyde Allaire, if he ends up being something special, you're talking about, first or second round, I think, end of the first round. Yep, end of the first round. They're going to have to pay him a decent sum of money going forward, assuming he pans out. So it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. But I think maybe you start to see where depth comes into play for a team that's trying to make multiple runs into deep playoffs.
One more thing I will add as far as the on the field game is concerned, and this isn't anything new. We've seen this before in the past. We saw this with Brady on the other side back in 2007 when they were undefeated against the Giants. You can get consistent pass rush with your front four, or your front three if it's a 3-4, and you don't need to constantly blitz. You can wreak havoc on a great quarterback, because the great quarterbacks are going to beat the blitz. They're going to pick it. They're going to see the guys who are opening. But if you can generate that pass rush with your front four and constantly knock him down or hit him or hurry him without having to send extra guys, you're going to give yourself a huge advantage.
Yeah, Vita Vea coming back in the playoffs, and you have wreaked havoc in that Packers game, and then obviously that carried over into the Super Bowl as well. They were just that dominant defense, and they played really, really well throughout the entire playoffs. We know that Kansas City and the Chiefs, they have their quarterback for the future, but not every team in the NFL is in that good of a position. So let's go ahead and move on to what I like to call quarterback musical chairs. We've already talked about the Stafford for Goff trade since we last spoke. We also had the almost inevitable Carson Wentz trade. This time he was actually sent to the Indianapolis Colts for a 2021 third-round pick and then a conditional second-round pick in 2022. If he plays, I think 75% of the snaps or 70%, plus they make the playoffs, that becomes a first-round pick. And it just pretty much shows that regardless of how bad people think the contract is, nobody is not movable in the NFL. So how do you guys feel about that fit? Matt, let's go with you first. How do you feel about that fit in that reunion with Frank Reich in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I mean, it makes as much sense as anywhere. I mean, Carson Wentz has been a real head scratcher as of late. A guy who obviously has a lot of skill, but something has gone horribly awry for Carson Wentz. And I don't know what that is. I mean, you hear about, golfers that, they get the yips and their career's completely ruined. And you wonder if something like that is happening psychologically to Carson Wentz. I know he has had some injuries, but I don't, none of those injuries seem like things that should take, their toll long-term on a body. So it's kind of weird. So ultimately, Indianapolis, I think, is a good team, a very good football team. They're good on both sides of the ball. It's a great place for a quarterback who is, a bunch of question marks. If you can't succeed right now in Indianapolis, you're not succeeding anywhere because their offensive line is real good. Maybe have the best offensive lineman in the game right now, Quentin Nelson. And then you take a look at what they've got defensively. I think they were the only team in the NFL that was ranked in the top 10 in offense and defense last year. So this is a great position to be in for Carson Wentz. Probably, besides the Super Bowl team that he was on, maybe the best all-around roster he's played with. So, if he can't do it, if you can, the opposite of New York, if you can't do it in Indianapolis right now, you can't do it anywhere. So, I mean, ultimately, how many other guys are there available out there that you could get of Carson Wentz's potential caliber? There's not a lot of guys out there unless you're willing to go all in on maybe a Deshaun Watson, and that doesn't seem like he's going anywhere at this point. But so we'll see. But yeah, I think it's a great move for both teams, obviously.
Chris, how about you? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Matt said there. Wentz, I mean, he played at was playing at an MVP level in 2017 before getting injured in the Super Bowl year, and then didn't really approach that level. But as recently as the end of 2019, he was playing at a pretty high level, and certainly a solid like above average starting quarterback, borderline Pro Bowl level, and then just fell off the face of the earth this year and looked as bad as anybody has in recent years. And we were wondering, which him or Peterson, which one of them is going to survive in Philadelphia? And truth be told, is neither. And I agree with what Matt said. I think he's going to probably the best place he can possibly be successful, other than potentially having great receivers. They've got everything they need. They've got a great line. They've got a great young running back, really good defense. So he's got a lot of things to succeed. He's a former offensive coordinator. Also, I don't know if you believe the stories that came out of Philadelphia, that Wentz has a lot of insecurities and didn't like that they drafted Jalen Hurts and didn't like that they had a Nick Foles statue after the Super Bowl, and just a lot of insecurity. Again, I don't know how much of that is true, right? There's a lot of stuff out there, but if there is any truth to that, he's going to a place where he is the unquestioned starter, and they don't have any options there, right? They're not going to put in Jacoby Brissett or a first round draft pick. So they're giving him the keys to the car. Indy is banking on that Wright can fix him. And if they can't, and if he can't, that they've got enough other pieces around him to kind of hide him for the next year or so. So I think it's a calculated gamble. By the Colts. They really didn't give up much to get him. I know that the 22 pick turns into a first round if he hits some incentives, but guess what? If he hits those incentives, it means they've made the playoffs. So you take that if you're Indy. So I think it's a great move by the Colts, and it's a fresh start for Philadelphia, who is going to be pretty awful this year.
Yeah, and Philadelphia they might have Jalen Hurts, but
Yeah, they've got a good cheap. They got a cheap option in Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
A few nice things here. They can definitely give the opportunity to see what he can do. I don't think they're going to take a quarterback. They're probably going to take a skill position player. I would be shocked if they don't take one of the top 3 receivers in the draft, either Smith or Waddle, who's over there. They'll get a chance there to see if Hurts can be the guy, and if he's not, then they'll be in line at the top of next year's draft to grab their guy.
Yep. As we move on from Wentz, we have talked about Deshaun Watson and his repeated request to be traded from the Texans, and 2 months later, essentially, there's been no change. The only thing that's changed around him is that there might be some competition from other teams. If they want to get a high quality top 5 quarterback, and potentially Russell Wilson, whose name is leaked in the last couple of weeks, as potentially being on the block. Though it doesn't sound like he wants to go anywhere, but he has a list of certain teams he wants to go to. It's everything's a mess with those. So do we think that there's going to be any traction between Watson or Russ at this point, or do you think that starting the 2021 season in a couple months that they're going to be starting for the Texans and the Seahawks respectively?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I don't understand this Russell Wilson issue at all from the Seahawks perspective. It doesn't make any damn sense to me. You have one of the better quarterbacks in this league who's been consistently one of the better quarterbacks in this league. Not his best season on the second half of this season, but you know what you have. He's a proven quantity. And the only comment that they can get upset about is that he mentioned that he didn't like getting hit. What quarterback likes getting hit? Like, why is that breaking news that Russell Wilson wants to be hit less? He had pretty high sack numbers for him, which isn't, higher of his career than usual. I don't understand why that's offensive to the to the Seahawks to say. And then they come out, and they say they're upset by it. And then Russell just says, I've got a no trade clause. So if you're looking to trade me, here's the only 4 teams I'll go to. And so basically, yes, should he not have leaked whatever that information was to the public? Sure. But at the same time, I don't understand. He doesn't sound like, when you say I don't want to get hit as much as I do, doesn't sound like bad mouthing an organization. And then on the other flip side of that, they come back and basically bad mouth him. So it's like this escalating pissing match. And what does it do is make your team have question marks that you don't need, because he's not going anywhere. Why would they get rid of him? There's not enough. There's not enough draft picks in the world to get a guy like that. Or Deshaun. The only reason Deshaun Watson would ever be moved is because he just will refuse to play there. Like, Russ isn't going to do that. Like, so the big bargaining chip isn't there for that, right? So as much as little, as disgruntled as he might be, they still have a player. Whereas Deshaun Watson's situation feels a little more like, maybe Deshaun Watson would be willing to sit out. And if he sits out, then everything goes, up in smoke. Whereas Russ isn't going to sit out a season. There's no chance. So I don't know. It's they're both weird. I guess I'd put my chances at 5% that Russ moves, and let's go with 45 to 55% in that realm for Deshaun Watson, depending on what he does in the offseason here. If he decides not to come to camp, he decides not to come to camp, that number is going to go up to 60, 70% that he gets moved. But there's a bunch of quarterbacks out there that might get moved, and I don't see Russ being one of them.
Chris, how about your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Matt a lot tonight. Russ isn't going anywhere. Like, for all the reasons Matt just said. The whole thing is super weird. I agree with that. But the Seahawks season this year was kind of super weird. So maybe we can just chalk it up weird. They were maybe the only team that didn't have any positive tests, but they did a lot of other kind of bizarre stuff going on with them. So, good for them in following the health protocols. But on the field, it was just kind of an odd season, despite an ultimately successful one where they, made it to the playoffs. So I don't think Russ is going anywhere. The Deshaun Watson thing is so interesting, right? You talk about, I just mentioned before about the Carson Wentz, and can you really believe all the stuff you read about it? But, if we're in the believing stuff you see in stories coming out, the Jack Easterby stuff, to me is just fascinating about Houston, how this culture coach has basically been shadow running the whole organization and masterminding everything. Drawing comparisons to Littlefinger in Game of Thrones. It's, again, I don't know how much of it's true, but it's fascinating to read. The fact that like he was really the mastermind behind the DeAndre Hopkins trade and got Bill O'Brien to take the fall for it. Again, who knows if all this stuff is true. But that adds a little wrinkle to this whole situation. This is different than your typical quarterback being unhappy with his contract or his linemen or his lack of receivers or something like that. But on the other side of that, Houston has showed no interest in wanting to move Deshaun Watson. And, when it actually gets to sitting out games and forfeiting game checks, is Deshaun going to do that? Right? The closest situation you had with this was when Carson Palmer essentially talked his way out of Cincinnati. But Carson Palmer threatened to retire. He was like, 32 years old at the time. He had been for a while, maybe 30, maybe a little younger, but like still, he was at a point in his career where you could say, I see it. He could retire. Is Deshaun Watson at the height of his ability and his powers as a player? Is he really going to sit out? I mean, if the situation is bad enough, maybe. But the other way to look at that is if you're Houston, right? You went 4-12 with Deshaun having a career year. You've just lost JJ Watt. You're back, right? You could look at this as your opportunity to make a Herschel Walker trade and just kick your rebuild into the next phase, right? I think there's some concern. If you're Houston and you don't want to trade Watson, are you not wanting to trade him because you really want to patch it up and try to win with him? Or are you not doing it because you are afraid of what people are going to say about you for trading a franchise quarterback? I don't know. I think it's an opportunity for Houston to really kickstart their rebuild. But, again, that's tough for me saying on the outside. So, again, I'm with Matt. I think Russ getting traded is about, I would say about 5% Russ gets traded and about 50% Deshaun gets traded. Which is interesting here is that I think a lot of the other teams on the quarterback carousel are waiting to see what happens with Houston because Deshaun is clearly the best quarterback on the market. So I don't really consider Russ. I mean, take your pick between the two of them, right? Russ is more accomplished. Watson is younger, but I don't really consider Russ on the market. I do consider Watson on the market. And no one's going to make a move until there's clarity on him, because then the dominoes could potentially fall from there.
Yeah, and you got to imagine we're still 4 or 5 weeks away from the draft, if not more, and you just have to imagine that somebody, whether it's going to be the Dolphins or somebody else, is just going to potentially just see that you have 25-year-old franchise star quarterbacks don't come on the market all the time, and
the Dolphins are in a really unique position because usually you don't have teams that went 10-6 and just missed the playoffs have the third overall pick, 2 first-round picks, and a ton of cap space, right? Usually that's not there. So it could be an opportunity where both teams can make something work.
The only other tied to the QB musical chairs, it sounds like Alex Smith is going to get released by the Washington football team. That's news is coming down, not officially, but it seems like all signs are pointing towards that. We're still waiting to see if there's any other shoes are going to be dropping tied to other quarterbacks. It sounds like Ben Roethlisberger is going to be back in Pittsburgh, so hooray for me being a Steelers fan. I'm super excited for that to just kick that can down the road when everybody knows how this is going to end for them. But in terms of everything else, any other quarterbacks you guys want to talk about before we kind of shift gears and move on?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of surprising to me that there hasn't been more talk about Matt Ryan at this point. That I just feel like Atlanta feels like they're in a complete teardown, and I just don't know what keeping a guy like Matt Ryan does for you at this point. I think you could garner a lot for a guy like that. Like for example, if I don't think maybe Atlanta had no interest in taking on a contract like Jared Goff's. Okay, but if you got your choice between recent MVP winner, and Matt Ryan, and Stafford out of Detroit. I mean, Ryan looks better on paper, probably, right? So It's kind of odd to me because what they got was a ton. What Detroit got was a ton. Even if you take, I mean, especially if you take Goff out of it, it's a huge haul, right? Goff is almost like something you had to take to make it work. And I just feel like that was a lot to give up. And if you could have had Matt Ryan for that same price, so I'm kind of wondering if a team like say Miami doesn't want to go in full bore and pay the price that Deshaun Watson's going to take. Does Matt Ryan end up moving a short distance from from Atlanta to Miami just because they are so close to having one piece away, and that a team looks like they're good on both sides of the ball. They've got lots of things going for them. Their defense is great. I don't know. I just feel like something's going to give there, and I just don't know why Atlanta would want to hold on to an aging Matt Ryan at this point. But especially with no coach, the same coach being there, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But stranger things have happened in the NFL.
yeah, especially potentially, bringing back, Justin Fields and that was the top 6 pick. I mean, it just seems like that would make a lot of sense in terms of like what their future would be. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple teams like that, talking about Miami being there, but I also think that, Washington, they currently will not have a quarterback. They could, try to trade for somebody or try to sign somebody straight out. I don't know what their cap situation is, but then also Carolina is obviously desperate to bring in somebody who's better than Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, the Teddy Bridgewater experiment was fine, but if you can get, they probably won't get Matt Ryan because you're not going to get an interdivision quarterback like that. But they might be a dark horse Watson, team out there.
Yeah, and San Francisco too. I mean, San Francisco's quarterback situation doesn't seem locked in at this point, and we haven't even talked about the Patriots. They don't have a quarterback either. Like, so like, there's a bunch of teams out there that are like a quarterback away from making playoffs and maybe making playoff runs. And it's weird to me that guys that are on the downside of the hill of their career aren't being talked about more. I mean, Stafford, we knew he wanted to go on, and Detroit said they didn't care if he left or not, basically. So that was the one that was like clearly going to happen. But to me, Matt Ryan seems like just as much of a slam dunk. Like for both teams, whatever team it would be in Atlanta.
So I can kind of jump on that. So actually, Matt, I kind of disagree with you on that, Matt Ryan. Well, I don't disagree with you in that I would necessarily do that if I were running Atlanta, but they've given no indication that they're doing a teardown there in Atlanta. I know Matt Ryan's contract makes him pretty tough to move. And I think they feel like there's still a lot of talent in that team. They brought in a new coach. They still have there's still some good players there. They haven't really given the inclination that they're holding any kind of fire sale. So rightly or wrongly, I think they still think that they can win this roster. Again, it's not necessarily the right move. But I think now they might take the opportunity they might grab Justin Fields with the number 4 pick or Zach Wilson. But still keep Matt Ryan and let him play for a year so they can keep Fields or Wilson on the bench. I could see that happening. But yeah, I don't necessarily think Ryan's going to be on the move this year. Next year, that might be a different story. Talking about the team that needs quarterback, let's also not forget about the Chicago Bears. I mean, we talk about it is in maybe the definition of in quarterback purgatory, right? They made the playoffs this year, albeit in a weak NFC, but they still made the playoffs. They have a really good defense. They've got some parts, although, Allen Robinson's a free agent and David Montgomery had a nice year. Solid line, but they don't have, they're going to be moving on from Mitch Trubisky, which I think is probably a wild move, although Trubisky, I wouldn't necessarily rule him out as an NFL starter. I think he's a guy who could go somewhere and maybe a change of scenery could do him good. It might be a Tannehill type situation. But they're in need of a quarterback. They're not going to be drafting high enough to get anybody. And then another guy to kind of fix the mind is Sam Darnold in New York. I mean, think about another guy who might just need a change of scenery. And I think we're not going to know about that until the Jets are able to evaluate Zach Wilson and Justin Fields and the other quarterbacks in this draft, right? If they determine that one of those guys is the guy that they want to build their team around in the future, then you take him at 2, and you move Darnold for whatever you can get for him. But Darnold to the Bears might not be a horrible option, right? To go to a team where he's not going to be asked to do everything, or Washington. If they decide that they don't think either one of those guys has more upside than Darnold, and Robert Saleh thinks they can get him straight, then maybe they auction that pick off and more picks, because that is a bad roster and they need lots of help. That would be a good way to do that. And then you mentioned San Francisco with Jimmy Garoppolo. He's probably going to come back with there unless they have a chance to get Deshaun Watson. And if San Francisco would be kind of maybe by dark horse for Deshaun Watson, because they do have a reasonably high pick this year, and some other parts. So if they were able to get Deshaun, then they're obviously going to move Jimmy Garoppolo. Do they trade him back to New England? I've heard that. Do they trade him to Washington? I think San Francisco will probably stick with Jimmy unless they can significantly upgrade in the form of Watson.
Yeah, we got all these quarterbacks going to be linked to the Bears. They're just going to sign Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he's just going to be their quarterback for 2021. And it's going to be beautiful. It will be great, but he won't be like the long-term solution. It feels like, man, we've talked about so many teams tied to quarterbacks. Even just how many teams actually have quarterbacks of the future? 7? 7?
Yeah, Chris and I actually were talking about this this past weekend. How many guys right now? How many teams are like, I have my quarterback on my roster right now that will be my starting quarterback in 4 years? There's not that many teams that can say to a really high confidence level they have that guy. And that's crazy to think that in the NFL right now you've got Mahomes, Allen, maybe Baker Mayfield, and the list just keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter, especially when you start taking guys like Russ off of that list, which doesn't make any damn sense. Like, that seems like a surefire slam dunk, but Watson. Apparently not. Yeah, Deshaun Watson too. But I mean, at least there we know that there's some issues. As of a month ago, there was no issues in Seattle. Who knows? So yeah, I mean, it's like it's a weird. And then you got Arizona maybe, and a couple of other teams floating around where Baltimore. Baltimore is weird though too, because God, I just feel like he didn't have a great playoff game, and oh man, the questions are back there again for him. So it's like, you said 7 is a probably fair number for that, and maybe it's lower than that, which is insane.
Yeah, and you can't even, the NFL MVP, he's 37, 38 years old up in Green Bay. You can't imagine, Rodgers is going to be there for another 4 years. How is he going to be there in 6 months? Who knows at this point? This could be that's why it's going to be a really fascinating, start of free agency, and then obviously all the way up to the NFL draft, because there could be a lot of movement depending on whatever quarterback situation pops up for any of those. We didn't even talk about Drew Brees. Looks like Drew Brees is actually going to be retiring, and then is it going to be Taysom Hill? Is it going to be, Jameis Winston? Is it going to be neither of them? And are they going to have a Teddy reunion? I have no idea what's going down there.
I mean, you talk about a team that still has an awesome roster, and is in, Super Bowl contention roster, but big questions at quarterback.
I said earlier that I'm going to boycott the NFL if somehow Jameis isn't the starting quarterback on that team this next year, because that's going to be way too much fun to watch. There's a lot of balls that could get thrown around everywhere on that team, and Jameis Winston is the guy that can do it. I'm 100% for that experiment, and it needs to happen.
Oh man, yeah. So it's this was calling it cute quarterback musical chairs is the best way to frame this entire discussion, because it literally is going to be that way. It's just the league is just going to look so much different in terms of opening nights and opening week in a couple of months.
Unless it's not there's a scenario that where most of these guys end up staying where they are, and then just be also kind of crazy.
Yeah, but you might have as many as 6 rookie quarterbacks starting week 1 in the NFL next year, which is crazy too.
Yeah. And then we're all just going to miss the inevitable Kyler Murray for Deshaun Watson trade that's going to come across, because Arizona is just becoming Houston West, even more further west at this point.
Yes.
Yeah. Outside of outside of the JJ Watt move to Arizona, we really haven't seen too much other player movement. Obviously, we've had a few players cut, like AJ Boye, Duke Johnson, just some of the other. They're fine, but we haven't had any big moves, and obviously, we probably won't see anything for a couple of weeks. Do you guys have any hot takes or any hopes of like what would be a really good free agent fit, whether it's quarterback, whether it's wide receiver? I mean, we got Allen Robinson and Godwin and Galladay potentially all on the market. Is there anybody that you would really feel would fit in really well that you guys want to throw out there?
And there is so many good wide receivers on this market right now, and some big name defensive players too. As a Browns fan that needs some help on the DB side, I would love a Justin Simmons to come and wear brown. That would be great. There's, if you look at like what teams really need wide receiver help with the quarterbacks they have. Even then you get to pick three of maybe even 3 or 4 guys that you are different kind of wide receivers. So you could go pick the thing your team needs. It's not like, okay, we have to take this burner guy because he's the best guy there is on the market. Like literally you could be like, well, no, I want the giant one. Like I'll take the one that's got great hands and is small. Like you've got all of those options. They're all out there. But let's throw one out there that I just can't see. I have a feeling Robinson will end up back in Chicago. It just feels like that's going to happen to me. They're not going to bring Galladay back. So let me send Galladay to a team that needs some help in a big way. Let's go with Miami. That makes a lot of sense. Miami, Galladay to Miami, and then paired up with either a good rookie quarterback or continue on with Tua. They need some weaponry down there on the outside, especially a big target would be huge for Miami. So let me go Galladay to Miami. That'll be my one call, but anything could happen, and it's going to be fascinating, and there's so many good players out there.
Yeah, I almost said Allen Robinson to Jacksonville. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't think that's going to be a reunion we see. But Galladay to Jacksonville would also be very interesting. Kind of put him on the other side of DJ Chark, and the expectation that they're going to have Trevor Lawrence here in a couple of months as well. So, Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I'll take another receiver. I could certainly see this with any of the number ones. And I really hope this doesn't happen as a Browns fan, but I think it could make a lot of sense. I will say Chris Godwin to Baltimore. You could also say that with Galladay too, right? They need a outside receiver, a number one receiver who's a burner down the field, who can run good routes, who can high points, who can help Lamar on those deep out routes. Most of Lamar's success in the passing game is tight ends deep over the middle, and they got a great one in Andrews, and then like scramble drill. He's struggled throwing the ball long down the sidelines this year. Now, is that a flaw in his game, or is it a product of not having outside wide receivers? We don't know. There's one way to figure that out, and it's to bring them a number one receiver. The Ravens for years have been one of the better teams overall in their drafting with DeCastro and certainly going back to Ozzie Newsome, but they had a blind spot for the wide receiver position. Again, I would hate to see this as a Browns fan, but one of those potential number one receivers, speed outside guys to the Ravens makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to say Allen Robinson to Oakland. I'm not sure if they can make the cap work, but essentially they have Darren Waller and nobody else out there.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think if that's a good place if they can pry him out of there. I don't know. It just felt like to me that he didn't. I don't know. Maybe he wants to go and win someplace, but he had a really good couple of seasons in Chicago. I don't with bad quarterback play. So, eventually, if they sign him to a big deal, he'll get a good quarterback eventually, right? Somebody has to show up. Somebody at some point has to show up.
I could see the Bears franchising him too if they can't work out a deal.
Yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, although a franchise tag on a wide receiver is a ton of money, so that one's a little hard to swallow sometimes, especially when guys like Michael Thomas are making $100 million on 5-year deals.
They're not
so
paying
like
a quarterback in Chicago right now.
that is true.
true.
That is true. You can save money on the guy who throws the ball to the guy. That's smart.
Well, yeah, and then also we throw in the wrench of like all these wide receivers are going to get big deals when there's the incoming wide receiver draft class is one of the potentially a historic wide receiver draft class again. So yeah, that's just everything just comes back to the whether it's player empowerment in terms of like getting those quarterbacks to move really good, like defensive players like you mentioned, like Levante David. Is he going to leave Tampa Bay, or are we going to see some of those kinds of like really good free agency moves, or that all that plus a draft potentially for the ages? It's a great time to be in the NFL.
I think we're going to learn a lot about what happens with Tampa in this offseason. When you look at guys like Shaq Barrett, Levante David, and Chris Godwin, we're going to see how important being part of this championship wave is, and how important running it back and getting another title is to these guys. Or if they're like, I got my ring now, thanks Tom, now I'm going to get paid. We'll see.
Well, yeah, and then at that point, does Brady start recruiting other players? Obviously
right.
He has a relationship with AB, and they'll have Gronk back next year. But is somebody else going to be drawn to maybe a 1-year deal to get the Tampa Bay just to see if they can get a ring?
There's some short wide receivers that'll be on the market that might end up in Tampa Bay. I'm just going to throw that out there. That seems like that's going to happen, right?
Right. Any final thoughts as we finish up? I mean, like I said, we were kind of just waiting for free agency and the new league year to begin, but anything that we haven't talked about that you guys want to circle back and touch base on before we finish tonight?
We didn't talk about JJ Watt really at all. Came out of nowhere going to Arizona. So, good job, Cardinals. We were all kind of surprised, again, as us Browns fans, we were hoping that he would go to Cleveland, but we thought maybe, Buffalo or Green Bay or the Rams would make some sense. And, Arizona, they're definitely a playoff contender, but certainly I don't think a Super Bowl contender. So maybe it turns out that climate and getting paid was more important for JJ. I will say, though, that NFC West is going to be a lot of fun next year.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now, my prediction to win the NFC West next year is whoever has the fewest injuries.
So not the Niners. Okay, cool.
All 4 of those teams are really good. And I think that division may literally just come down to injuries.
I don't know. I think Stafford makes that team a lot better, in my opinion. So I think the Rams are my clear favorite, especially if they can't figure out their stuff in Stanford and Seattle. But I think a thing we didn't talk about when we were talking about the quarterback carousel is how important it is to have siblings that you like. Because I don't know if you saw this or not, but David Carr basically said that any team that Russ wanted to go to should jump at the chance to take him. And he listed 4 teams, and one of those teams happened to be his brother's team. So maybe it's important to have family you can trust who won't stab you in the back and say that, hey, if I'm Oakland, I'm cutting my brother and I'm going to go get Russ, which it would be the smart move. He's not wrong. But at the same time, get family and friends you could trust.
Also, can we get kind of getting back to what I said before with like Houston and Jack Easterby and everything going on there? Can we please get the Cardinals on Hard Knocks next year so we can just get JJ and DeAndre Hopkins just like dishing about everything that was going on there? Like, sign me up right now and give me the popcorn.
Yeah, I mean, if we were talking about this too. If you look at the teams that are available to be on it, right? So the NFL says if you have a new head coach, you can't be on Hard Knocks, and if you made the playoffs last year, you don't have to be on Hard Knocks. Any team, they can ask any team if they say yes, but no one ever does because they don't want the distraction, right? So that leaves you with some pretty interesting storylines. You've got the Cardinals, you've got the Patriots, which could be a lot of fun. You've got Miami, which could be a lot of fun, especially if they end up signing, landing Deshaun Watson. So
Niners,
Niners. Yeah, you've got it could be Carolina, which doesn't sound like a lot of fun again, but if Deshaun Watson ends up there, that's a fun one too. So with the extra team added to the playoffs and now the giant coaching carousel we had this year, the amount of teams it can be is surprisingly low, and there's a lot of really good, interesting storylines. But I'm kind of with Chris. I want to watch that. I want to watch the Cardinals. Bengals could be on that list too, but no one in the world wants to watch that, and not even Bengals fans. I've asked, and yeah. So, and then I mean, obviously, Belichick's always fun, so I wouldn't
It's
mind
gonna be
that.
the Patriots, right? Like
It's gonna have to be.
HBO's got to be like, oh my God, we actually have a chance to get the Patriots on Hard Knocks. Their first
Yeah.
year after missing the playoffs, the first year in forever without Brady, and then watching Brady go win it. Yeah, it's gonna be the Patriots. Like,
Yeah, which I'm also okay with.
yeah.
And then they draft Mac Jones, and then Bill Belichick just proceeds to make Mac Jones cry for the entirety of Hard Knocks.
I'm here for that too.
Yes.
Yeah. As an Ohio State fan, I'm actually here for that as well. That actually sounds fantastic. And Bill Belichick, please do that. All right, guys, let's go ahead and wrap up for this evening. So thank you all so much for joining us here. Make sure to subscribe here on YouTube, and you can also follow us at Hark-Adams Sports on Twitter. So for Drew Hare, Matt Harkleroad, and Chris Adams, our analysts, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
Yep.